I have hesitated to approach this topic at any length because it is a difficult task. The difficulty is in the idea that the doctrine of the rapture has been so fully ingrained into our culture that it has become a part of our faith in America. There are greater men than myself who are more knowledgeable on this topic, such as Pastors Joel Webbin, Jeff Durbin, Douglas Wilson, all men who I have great respect for. But they have more important work to do in the kingdom, and I am but a simple man with a vested interest in ending this doctrine.
The Bible talks about this coming world ruler, the Antichrist. It's interesting, he's called the little horn. So he arises first insignificantly. That's why when people always write me today and say, well, who do you think the Antichrist is? And they're trying to figure out the Antichrist. We don't know who he is today. He's going to rise insignificantly.
Notice that he keeps using this phrase, that he will rise insignificantly, but where does he get that from? He attributes the idea of rising in insignificance to the phrase little horn, using his imagination to determine that because it's a little horn, it's an insignificant horn. So he takes that little inch and runs off a mile with it, taking you with him. But not today. Because we, as faithful disciples, are not going to allow our imagination to determine what little horn could mean. Later in the same chapter, the angel Gabriel gives a description of the 10 horns, saying, "As for the 10 horns, out of this kingdom 10 kings shall rise, and another shall arise after them. He shall be different from the former ones, and shall put down 3 kings." Now, if you go through and read this entire section, it's littered with things like this that tell you what's going to happen with these kings. Now, if you just let your imagination get carried away and stop here, you're going to miss that Gabriel also gave Daniel a timeline. The timeline itself is also worded very cryptically, but there is one very key clue that we can take to tell us exactly when these things were taking place. But first, you have to remember that when Daniel was writing this, he was not in Israel. He was in Babylon, and Israel was under their control. Because of these verses, people await a building of a 3rd temple in Jerusalem, when in reality, Daniel was prophesying about the rebuilding of the 2nd temple. Daniel says in chapter 9 that the Messiah will be cut off and have nothing after the 62 weeks. And just weeks before that event, in Matthew chapter 24, Jesus refers back to what Daniel was speaking of, confirming that it was finally time for these things to take place. The temple that Daniel prophesied would be rebuilt, would be destroyed, and it would happen within that generation. You have to understand that at the destruction of the temple, the canon of Scripture is closed. There is no prophesying of a 3rd temple, ever. And if you are a Christian living today calling for the destruction of the 3rd temple, you are calling for the destruction of your own body as the temple of the Holy Spirit. You must stop praying for such things.